The forest was silent except for the howling wind. Snowflakes drifted down, covering the ground in a cold white sheet. A young girl, Lena, 12, blind, shivered as her father's rough hands tied her to a thick oak tree. Her wrists burned from the rope, but she didn't cry. She knew begging wouldn't change his mind. "Papa, why?" Her voice trembled. Her father, Mr. Voss, a wealthy but cruel man, didn't answer. He tightened the last knot and stepped back. "The wolves will come soon. Consider this your punishment for being a burden." His footsteps crunched in the snow as he walked away, leaving her alone in the freezing dark. Lena's heart pounded. She couldn't see, but she could hear. The distant growls, the rustling of leaves. Something was coming. Closer, closer. Then, a warm breath touched her fingers. A wet nose nudged her hand. It wasn't a wolf. A German shepherd, massive and scarred, stood in front of her. His golden eyes glowed in the moonlight. He sniffed her. Then suddenly, he started chewing the ropes. Lena held her breath. Who was this dog? The ropes around Lena's wrists loosened as the German shepherd gnawed fiercely at the knots, his teeth working with surprising precision. The coarse fibers snapped one by one, and finally her hands were free. She reached out instinctively, her fingers sinking into the thick fur around his neck. The dog didn't growl or pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch, as if he understood her fear. The wind howled louder, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of wolves moving through the trees. Their snarls echoed in the distance, growing closer with every passing second. Lena's breath came in short, panicked bursts. She had heard stories about the wolves in these woods. They were ruthless, hungry, and they hunted in packs. Without her sight, she was completely vulnerable. The German shepherd suddenly stiffened beside her, his body tense, ears pricked forward. A low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. He wasn't just any stray, he was a protector. But why? Why would a dog she had never met risk his life for her? Before she could process the thought, the first wolf emerged from the shadows. Its yellow eyes glowed in the darkness, saliva dripping from its jaws as it locked onto Lena. The German shepherd stepped in front of her, his stance wide, teeth bared. The wolf hesitated, sizing up the larger dog. Then, with a snap of its jaws, it lunged. The two animals collided in a blur of fur and snarls. Lena stumbled back, her hands flailing for something, anything, to hold on to. Her fingers brushed against a fallen branch, and she gripped it tightly, swinging blindly in the direction of the fight. She heard a yelp, then the sound of retreating paws. The wolf had fled, for now, but the forest was alive with movement. More were coming. The German shepherd turned back to her, panting heavily. A fresh cut bled above his eye, but he didn't seem to care. He nudged her leg urgently, as if telling her to move. Lena didn't need to see to understand. They had to run. She clutched the fur at his shoulder, letting him guide her through the trees. Snow crunched beneath her feet, the cold biting at her skin, but she forced herself forward. Behind them, the wolves gave chase, their howls turning into frenzied barks. The dog led her through a narrow path, his body pressed close to hers, ensuring she didn't fall. Then, without warning, the ground beneath her disappeared. Lena gasped as she tumbled down a steep slope, rolling over roots and rocks before landing hard on her back. Pain shot through her body, but the German shepherd was already at her side, licking her face frantically. She coughed, sitting up slowly. The fall had disoriented her even more. Where were they? The wolves' barks sounded farther away now. Had they lost them? The dog nudged her again, urging her to keep moving, but then a new sound made her freeze, a man's voice. Well, What do we have here?" The voice was rough, amused. Lena's blood ran colder than the snow around her. It wasn't her father. This was someone else, someone who shouldn't be here. The German shepherd's growl returned, deeper this time, more dangerous. But the man only laughed. "A blind girl and a mutt. You two are a long way from home." Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She had escaped the wolves, but had she just stumbled into something worse? Lena's breath caught in her throat as the stranger's footsteps crunched closer through the snow. The German shepherd's growl intensified, his body vibrating with tension against her side. She could smell the man now, tobacco, sweat, and something metallic that made her stomach twist. "Easy there, boy," the man chuckled, his voice dripping with false warmth. "No need for that. I'm just here to help." His words slithered through the cold air, but everything about him felt wrong. The dog didn't relax. Neither did Lena. A sudden rustling in the bushes made the man pause. Lena heard the distinct click of a gun's safety being released. "You alone out here, little girl?" he asked, his tone shifting from mock concern to something sharper. The German shepherd inched forward, placing himself squarely between Lena and the threat. The man snorted. "Brave mutt, but I've put down bigger dogs than you." Then a miracle. A deep, authoritative voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Drop the weapon, now!" The stranger stiffened. Lena turned her head toward the new voice, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Heavy boots approached, at least 2 sets, their owners moving with purpose. "I said drop it," the voice repeated, colder this time. Metal clattered to the ground. The stranger cursed under his breath. "Lena?" The new voice was closer now, gentler, familiar. Her breath hitched. She knew that voice. "Uncle Elias," she whispered, disbelief cracking her words. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, pulling her into a hug that smelled of pine and gunpowder. "How did you—" "Your father told me what he did," Elias interrupted, his voice tight with fury. "I came as fast as I could." Behind him, another man, a police officer judging by the radio static, was cuffing the stranger. "This piece of trash has been poaching in these woods for weeks. Lucky for us, he led us right to you." Lena sagged against her uncle, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. But the German shepherd let out a sharp bark, his claws scraping against the frozen ground. He wasn't calm, he wasn't done. Because the wolves were back. And this time, they weren't alone. A chorus of howls erupted from the trees, far too many to count. The officer swore, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to reveal glowing eyes, dozens of them, ringing the clearing. The poacher laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "You idiots! You led them right to us." The German shepherd planted himself in front of Lena, his lips peeled back in a snarl. But one dog, no matter how brave, couldn't fight an entire pack. Elias shoved Lena behind him, his rifle raised. "Stay close," he ordered. The officer radioed frantically for backup, but the static that crackled back was useless. They were on their own. The first wolf lunged. A gunshot rang out, then chaos. The gunshot echoed through the frozen forest like a thunderclap, its reverberations shaking snow from the pine branches overhead. The lead wolf collapsed mid-leap, its body skidding across the icy ground just feet from Lena's trembling legs. For one terrible second, silence hung over the clearing. Then the night exploded into movement. The remaining wolves didn't retreat at the gunfire as they should have. Instead, their glowing eyes flashed with unnatural intelligence as they began circling faster, their movements synchronized like soldiers following orders. Uncle Elias fired again, but this time the wolves scattered with eerie precision, the bullet embedding itself harmlessly in a tree. The poacher screamed as two wolves dragged him into the underbrush, his cries cutting off with a wet gurgle that made Lena's stomach heave. The German shepherd pressed against her side, his entire body vibrating with a growl that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. Then came the sound that froze the blood in Lena's veins. Laughter. Not human laughter, but something older, crueler, echoing from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The trees at the edge of the clearing parted like curtains, revealing a massive black wolf with eyes that burned like embers. It moved with impossible grace for its size, each paw step leaving behind faintly smoking prints in the snow. The other wolves fell silent and bowed their heads as it approached. The officer's flashlight flickered and died as the beast drew near, plunging them into near darkness lit only by the rising blood moon. "That's no ordinary wolf," Elias whispered, his rifle shaking in suddenly unsteady hands. The German shepherd let out a whine that sounded almost like recognition, his tail tucked between his legs for the first time. The black wolf's mouth opened in what could only be described as a grin, revealing yellowed fangs longer than Lena's fingers. When it spoke, its voice slithered into their minds like oil on water. "The blind child returns," it rasped, each word dripping with ancient malice, just as the pact demanded. Lena's breath came in short, panicked gasps. "What pact?" she cried out, her voice breaking. The creature's laugh echoed through the trees again as more shapes emerged from the darkness. Not wolves now, but men with the same burning eyes, dressed in tattered finery that might have been fashionable a century ago. The largest of them stepped forward, his face horribly familiar, even to Lena's sightless eyes. "The pact your great-grandfather made, child," the black wolf purred. "One blind girl every generation, or the entire village burns." Elias made a strangled noise of realization. The town archives, the disappearances every 30 years. His rifle clattered to the ground as the truth crashed over him. The German shepherd suddenly lunged forward with a defiant snarl, but the black wolf simply swatted him aside like a bothersome insect, sending the loyal animal crashing into a tree with a sickening crack. As the creature advanced on Lena, its form began to shift and twist in the moonlight, bones cracking as it stood upright on two legs. The last thing she felt before darkness took her was the scrape of claws against her cheek and a whispered promise. "Your father knew the price of breaking the pact. Now you'll serve twice over, as sacrifice and as warning." Somewhere in the distance, the German shepherd stirred weakly, his golden eyes flaring with desperate determination, even as blood matted his fur. The pact demanded a sacrifice, but it said nothing about what would happen if that sacrifice fought back. The world swam back into focus for Lena with the sharp scent of wet earth and rotting wood filling her nose. Her cheek throbbed where the creature's claws had marked her, each pulse of pain syncing with the distant rhythmic chanting that echoed through whatever dark place they'd taken her. When she tried to move, rough hemp ropes bit into her wrists, not tied to a tree this time, but to some sort of stone altar, its surface carved with symbols that prickled against her fingertips like static electricity. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of old blood and something fouler, the scent so thick it coated her tongue. Somewhere above, wind howled through gaps in what must have been an ancient, crumbling structure. The abandoned church from the village's darkest legends, the one even the bravest hunters avoided. A whimper to her left made her turn her head. The German shepherd lay crumpled in the corner, his breathing shallow but steady. Relief flooded through her until movement near him caught her attention. Not the beast men, but smaller shapes. Children. At least half a dozen, their breathing slow and even as if in enchanted sleep, each marked with the same strange symbols painted on their foreheads in what Lena desperately hoped wasn't blood. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't the first blind girl taken, just the latest in a cycle stretching back generations. The pact demanded more than just death. It demanded something from the sacrificed before they died. The chanting outside suddenly stopped. Footsteps approached, too light to be human. "You're awake," crooned a voice that wasn't quite the Black Wolf's, but carried the same otherworldly resonance. Cold fingers tilted her chin up. "Good. The ritual works better when the offering is conscious." Lena flinched away, but the grip tightened painfully. "Your father thought he could cheat us by giving you up early," the creature continued, its breath reeking of spoiled meat. "But the blood moon rises when it wills, not when men demand. We'll take what's owed, and then we'll take your village anyway for his insolence." Outside, the howling began again, but this time undercut by a new sound. Gunshots, shouting. The creature hissed and released her, spinning toward the noise just as the church's rotting doors exploded inward. Through the smoke and chaos, Lena heard Uncle Elias's voice roaring her name, followed by a cacophony of snarls and screams. But most astonishing was the sudden, deafening chorus of barking that joined the fray. Not just one dog, but dozens. The German shepherd staggered to his feet with a triumphant whine as the sounds of battle raged closer. Then the stone beneath Lena began to grow warm. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the heat intensified rapidly, the carved symbols under her hands glowing faintly against her skin. The ropes holding her smoked, then crumbled to ash. Some ancient magic, triggered by the chaos or her own desperation, was at work. The creature whirled back toward her with a shriek, but too late. Lena's fingers found the largest symbol at the altar's center and pressed down hard. Light erupted through the ruined church. Not the warm glow of fire, but an eerie blue radiance that made the very air vibrate. The sleeping children stirred as one, their markings flashing in unison. And from the forest beyond came an answering howl, not of wolves, but something older, something that made even the Black Wolf pause mid-attack. The German shepherd lunged to Lena's side, his body thrumming with energy as the glow intensified. The pact had been broken before, but never from inside the ritual itself. The last thing Lena saw before the light consumed everything was the look of primal terror in the Black Wolf's eyes as the church's ancient bell, silent for a century, began to toll on its own. The blue light pulsed like a living thing, its cold radiance washing over every surface of the ruined church in waves that made the very stones tremble. Lena's fingers remained fused to the altar's central symbol, her veins alight with a power she couldn't comprehend, a power that was somehow hers to command. The German shepherd pressed against her legs, his fur standing on end as the ancient bell's tolling grew louder, each reverberation sending cracks spiderwebbing through the church's remaining stained glass windows. Outside, the battle sounds had changed. Fewer gunshots now, more panicked howls from the wolfmen as something in the forest answered the bell's call with earth-shaking footsteps. The Black Wolf creature staggered back from Lena, its humanoid form flickering between shapes like a candle in the wind. "Impossible!" it snarled, its voice splitting into a dozen overlapping tones. "The pact cannot be undone." But even as it spoke, the glowing symbols on the sleeping children's foreheads began to rise like mist, swirling through the air toward Lena in glowing tendrils. Each wisp carried fragments of memories not her own. A girl with empty eyes standing where Lena now stood 30 years prior. Another before that, stretching back through time in an unbroken chain of stolen lives. The German shepherd whined as the memories flooded into Lena, his body shuddering as if he too could see them. Then came the voice. Not from the wolf, not from the church, but from the altar itself. A whisper like dry leaves scraping against stone. The seer is blind, but the blind shall see. The words seared themselves into Lena's mind, just as the church's remaining windows shattered outward, not from the bell's toll this time, but from the arrival of what had been summoned. Standing in the moonlight where the doors had been was a figure that made even the battle outside fall silent. Tall as the trees and clad in antlers that scraped the ceiling, its presence sucked the warmth from the air. The black wolf creature fell to its knees, its defiance crumbling. "No, you were banished," it howled. The figure didn't speak, only raised one skeletal hand toward the altar where Lena stood transfixed. In that moment, two impossible things happened simultaneously. First, Lena could see, truly see, for the first time in her life. The world exploded into color and shape. The after-images of the glowing symbols burned onto her retinas. Second, the German shepherd's form began to shift, his body elongating, his golden eyes flashing with human intelligence. The man who stood where the dog had been was gaunt and wild-haired, his skin marked with the same symbols as the altar. "Lena," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse, "you broke the circle." Outside, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The antlered figure took a step forward. The black wolf creature screamed, not in anger now, but in abject terror. And the last of the sleeping children opened their eyes. The world tilted violently as Lena's new vision overwhelmed her senses, the sudden flood of shapes and colors merging with the torrent of stolen memories still pouring into her mind. The man who had been the German shepherd, no, not just a man, she realized with a jolt, but her grandfather's youngest brother, missing since the last blood moon 30 years prior, reached out to steady her as her knees buckled. His hands were warm against her skin, the symbols etched into his flesh, pulsing in time with the altar's glow. Around them, the awakened children sat up in unison, their eyes reflecting the same eerie blue light that now danced along Lena's fingertips. The antlered figure remained motionless in the doorway, its presence casting elongated shadows that seemed to twist independently of the flickering torchlight. The black wolf creature's snarls had turned to whimpers as it cowered before the towering entity, its form flickering between wolf and man like a guttering candle. "You were supposed to be bound," it spat, though the defiance rang hollow. The antlered figure tilted its head, the movement sending a chorus of bone-chilling creaks through the church rafters. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of winter wind through bare branches. The bindings required willing sacrifice. Its hollow gaze shifted to Lena. This one did not consent. A new understanding crashed over Lena. The pact hadn't been about blind girls at all. That had been the wolfmen's perversion of the original agreement. The true bargain, buried beneath generations of twisted retellings, had been about balance. The village had promised to protect these woods, and in return the ancient power slumbering within them would keep darker things at bay. The black wolf and its kin were interlopers, parasites who had hijacked the ritual when the village grew careless. The German shepherd, no, her great-uncle Thomas, had tried to stop them 30 years ago and paid the price, cursed to walk as a beast until the cycle could be broken. Outside, the sounds of battle had ceased entirely. The remaining wolfmen were fleeing, their howls tinged with panic as the forest itself seemed to turn against them. Branches snapped in the distance as something massive moved through the trees, herding the creatures back toward the church like a shepherd corralling wayward sheep. The antlered figure stepped aside as the first of the wolfmen stumbled back through the ruined doorway, their eyes wide with terror. Thomas's grip on Lena's shoulder tightened. "It's time," he murmured. "The reckoning must be witnessed." The altar's symbols flared brighter as the antlered figure raised its hands, the shadows stretching unnaturally to pin the black wolf creature in place. The children's voices rose in an eerie chant, words Lena somehow knew without understanding. Power thrummed through the ancient stones beneath her feet, resonating in her bones. Then the screaming began. Not from the wolfmen, from the village. Distant but unmistakable, the sound of her father's voice rose above the others, raw with a pain that went beyond the physical. The black wolf creature laughed, a wet, choking sound. "You think you've won?" it gasped. "The pact works both ways, girl. Your village took the protection. Now they pay the price." The antlered figure went very still. Thomas's breath caught, and Lena realized with dawning horror that the ritual wasn't over. It had only just begun. The screams from the village rose into a chorus of terror that cut through the night like jagged glass, each cry sending fresh tremors through Lena's body. The antlered figure's head snapped toward the sound, its skeletal fingers curling into fists that cracked like breaking ice. Thomas, no longer the German shepherd, but not quite human either, his eyes still holding that golden canine glow, pulled Lena closer as the altar's symbols flared crimson, the blue light drowning in a sudden flood of red that painted the crumbling church walls in dripping streaks. The black wolf creature writhed in its shadowy bonds, laughing through bloodied teeth. "You broke the ritual, but the debt remains," it howled. "Your village took the forest's protection for generations. Did you think there wouldn't be a reckoning?" Lena's newfound vision blurred as another wave of memories slammed into her. Not just the stolen girls now, but every villager who had ever walked these woods. Hunters taking more game than they needed. Loggers felling the oldest trees. Her own father, years younger, standing where she now stood, bargaining with the black wolf to spare his sickly, blind daughter, only to seal her fate instead. The realization struck like a physical blow. Her father hadn't abandoned her to wolves. He'd sold her to them, and now the entire village would burn for his cowardice. The awakened children began to shake, their chants turning to whimpers as the altar's heat intensified. One by one, the glowing symbols on their foreheads darkened to black, the mark spreading down their faces like spilled ink. Thomas snarled and lunged for the nearest child, but the antlered figure moved faster, its branch-like fingers closing around his wrist. "The debt must be paid," it intoned, its voice hollow. "Blood for blood." Outside, the screaming reached a fever pitch, underscored by a new sound, the hungry crackle of flames. Lena tore her gaze from the horrifying scene and looked down at her own hands. The symbols there weren't blackening like the children's. They pulsed gold, the same gold as Thomas's eyes, the same gold as the German shepherd's fur had been. A choice shimmered in the air before her, as tangible as the ropes that had once bound her. The village or the woods, the past or the future, the easy path or the impossible one. She reached for the altar again. This time, the stone didn't just warm beneath her touch, it burned. The pain should have been unbearable, but Lena clung to it, let it sear away the last of her fear. The black wolf creature's laughter cut off abruptly as the red light flickered, then fractured into 1,000 shimmering strands. The antlered figure released Thomas and stepped back, its antlers scraping the ceiling as it tilted its head in what might have been respect. The children's markings stopped spreading. The village's screams faltered. And deep in the forest, something older than pacts, older than wolves, older than time itself, opened its eyes. The moment Lena's burning palms made full contact with the altar, time itself seemed to fracture. The church walls dissolved into swirling mist, the screams of the village fading into a hollow silence that rang louder than any noise. For a heartbeat, or perhaps a century, she existed outside of reality, suspended in a void where the only constants were the golden glow of her markings and the steady, grounding pressure of Thomas's hand on her shoulder. Then the world reassembled itself with a thunderous snap, but it was not the ruined church that took shape around them. They stood now in a clearing untouched by time, where ancient oaks formed a perfect circle under a sky blazing with unfamiliar constellations. At the center loomed a being that made the antlered figure seem small, a creature of living bark and starlight, its form shifting endlessly between wolf, man, and something far older. The first guardian's voice shook the earth when it spoke. "You have broken what should not be broken, child." Each word sent ripples through the air, distorting reality like stones tossed into a still pond. The black wolf creature, now reduced to a cowering, whimpering mass at the guardian's feet, let out a final pathetic whine before dissolving into shadow that seeped into the ground like blood into thirsty soil. The guardian paid it no mind, its luminous gaze fixed solely on Lena. "The pact was corruption," it continued, "but its undoing leaves the way unguarded. The hungering dark remembers this world now." Thomas stepped forward, his body flickering between human and canine forms as if the curse still clung to him. "Then let us stand guard in its place," he rasped, the words clearly paining him. The guardian's massive head tilted, considering. Around them, the clearing's perimeter began to darken, the trees at the edge of the circle withering unnaturally fast as something slithered through the newly formed gaps, something even the first guardian watched with what might have been wariness. Lena found her voice, though it sounded foreign to her own ears, layered with echoes of every sacrificed girl who came before her. "We'll pay the debt," she said, "but not with more blood." The golden symbols on her skin flared brighter, matching the pulse of the markings now visible on Thomas's arms and the foreheads of the awakened children, who had somehow appeared in the circle with them. The guardian's form stilled at last, settling into the shape of an enormous wolf carved from living wood. "The price will be your sight," it rumbled, "again and always. To guard the veil, you must walk both worlds, and no one sees both clearly for long." Before Lena could respond, the vision shattered. She gasped as the ruined church wall slammed back into existence around them, the antlered figure now kneeling where it had stood, its head bowed. Outside, the village's screams had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of dying flames. The children blinked dazedly, their markings faded to faint silver scars. Thomas swayed on his feet, more man now than beast, but his golden eyes held a new sorrow. And Lena? Lena raised a trembling hand to her face. The world had gone dark again. But this time, the darkness teemed with shapes. Shadowy figures moving at the edge of perception, whispering voices just below hearing, and far away, so far it might have been imagination, the unmistakable sound of a wolf howling in triumph. The darkness that enveloped Lena now was not the empty void of her childhood blindness. This darkness lived. It pulsed with half-seen shapes that slithered at the edges of her consciousness, whispering in languages older than the forest itself. Her fingers dug into the damp earth beneath her as she struggled to reconcile this new, terrible sight, the sight of things that should not be seen. The church ruins loomed around her in jagged outlines of smoldering energy. every stone humming with the echoes of long-dead prayers. The children's auras flickered like candle flames in the wind, their silver scars glowing faintly as they huddled together. Tomas stood apart from them, his form now solidly human, but haloed in swirling gold and black energy that crackled whenever he moved. The antlered figure remained kneeling, its presence diminished but still thrumming with power that vibrated in Lena's teeth. Outside, the silence broke with a sudden cacophony. Not screams this time, but voices raised in panicked questions. Footsteps pounded toward the church, accompanied by the flickering light of torches. Lena's heart clenched when she recognized her father's voice among them, hoarse and desperate. "Lena! Lena, answer me!" The sound sent conflicting waves of anger and longing through her. This man had condemned her to die, yet here he was, searching for her. Before she could process the emotion, the church doors burst open, revealing a crowd of villagers led by her disheveled father, his fine clothes torn and soot-streaked. His eyes locked onto her, widening in shock before filling with tears. "You're alive," he choked out, taking an unsteady step forward. Then his gaze landed on Thomas, and all color drained from his face. "Brother?" The word hung in the air like a knife poised to fall. Thomas's golden eyes burned with decades of pent-up fury, but when he spoke, his voice was eerily calm. "You made a bargain with them, Joseph. You knew what they were." The villagers murmured in confusion, several making warding signs with their hands as they took in the antlered figure and the marked children. Lena's father, Joseph, swayed on his feet, his hands trembling. I thought, they'd just take her sight completely, make her useless to them. I never meant—" A collective gasp cut him off as the shadows near the altar coalesced into a new shape, a specter of a young woman in tattered clothing, her empty eye sockets dripping black tears. Lena recognized her instantly from the flood of memories. The sacrifice from 30 years prior, Tomas's daughter. Her ghostly mouth opened, and when she spoke, the voice was a chorus of every stolen girl. "You never meant for us to die?" The accusation shattered the last of Joseph's composure. He fell to his knees, his shoulders shaking. "I was weak," he sobbed. "I was afraid." The antlered figure rose slowly, drawing every eye in the room. "Fear birthed this corruption," it intoned, "but courage may yet mend it." Its hollow gaze settled on Lena. "The first guardian has spoken. The veil needs new keepers." As if summoned by the words, the wind howling through the ruined church carried a new sound. The distant, mournful howl of a wolf that was not a wolf. The children stirred, their silver scars pulsing in response. One by one, they rose and moved to stand beside Lena, their small hands finding hers with unerring accuracy despite her blindness. Tomas placed a weathered hand on her shoulder, his touch heavy with both burden and promise. Joseph looked up, his face a mask of dawning horror. "What have you done to my daughter?" he whispered. Lena turned her sightless eyes toward him, and for the first time she pitied him. "What you never could," she said softly. Then she raised her voice, letting it ring through the ruined church with an authority that didn't feel entirely her own. "The village will remember. From this night forward, no blind girl will be turned away, no debt will go unpaid, and no one will forget the price of breaking faith with these woods." As the words left her lips, the first rays of dawn pierced through the broken stained glass, painting the scattered pews in fractured rainbows. But the true miracle came when the light touched the children's silver scars. One by one, their eyes cleared, their vision restored. Lena alone remained in darkness, though the living shadows now swirled around her with something almost like reverence. The antlered figure bowed its head. The bargain is struck. And deep in the forest, beneath roots that had never known sunlight, something ancient and hungry stirred in its slumber, not in anger, but in anticipation. The fragile peace that had settled over the village in the weeks following the blood moon was an illusion. Lena knew this in her bones, could feel it in the way the very air trembled with restrained energy each time she walked the forest's edge. Though her physical eyes remained blind, her new vision revealed layers of existence hidden from ordinary sight. The shimmering silver threads of life connecting every tree and stone, the pulsing crimson veins of corruption snaking beneath the village streets like subterranean rivers of poison. The flickering auras surrounding each villager that betrayed their secret fears and desires, in colors more vivid than any spoken confession. The children who had been saved from the altar, those marked with the silver scars, had returned to their families, their wounds fading to faint lines only visible when moonlight struck at just the right angle. But their eyes had changed. Lena could see it even without seeing, the way parents hesitated when those children spoke, how the village dogs whined and tucked their tails when the marked ones passed by. There was knowledge in those young gazes now, a weight that should never have belonged to children. Tomas had taken up residence in the abandoned gamekeeper's cottage at the forest's edge, the same cottage where he'd lived 30 years earlier before his disappearance. The villagers whispered that he never slept, that his golden eyes could be seen glowing in the darkness from the cottage window at all hours, watching the tree line with unblinking intensity. Lena visited him often, though their conversations were strained, burdened by the unspoken truth that they were both caught in a current much stronger than either of them. The villagers' treatment of them swung wildly between reverence and terror. Some left offerings of bread and honey at their doors. Others crossed themselves and hurried away when they approached. The fear radiating from those people was a tangible thing to Lena now, a sour metallic taste on her tongue that lingered like the aftertaste of spoiled milk. Her father had become a ghost in his own home. Joseph Voss locked himself in his study day and night, emerging only to wander the woods at the most unnatural hours, times when even the nocturnal creatures held their breath. Lena could track his movements by the sickly yellow-green aura he left trailing behind him, a visible manifestation of his guilt and desperation that clung to the air like oil on water. She wanted to pity him, this broken man who had once been her father, but the memory of those ghostly girls' voices still echoed in her marrow, their collective anguish turning any compassion to ashes in her mouth. The antlered figure, whom the village children had taken to calling the stag in hushed, awed tones, appeared at the tree line each dusk, its hollow eyes watching, waiting for something only it seemed to understand. The uneasy truce between village and forest held, but Lena felt its fragility in every breath, like walking across a frozen lake and hearing the ice crack beneath each step, never knowing which one would be the last. Then came the morning when little Marta disappeared. The 6-year-old had been picking wildflowers at the forest's edge. Innocent play, the kind all village children engaged in during the first warm days of spring. Her mother had turned away for just a moment, to scold an older brother, to adjust her basket, and when she looked back, Marta was gone. The girl's faint, truncated scream had brought villagers running from all directions, but all they found were her scattered blooms, white wood anemones and purple violets, trampled into the mud, and a single small footprint pointing unmistakably into the woods. What chilled them more than the disappearance itself was the unnatural stillness that had fallen over that section of forest. No bird song, no insect hum, not even the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was as if the very air had frozen in terror. Lena had felt the disturbance before the search party reached her door, a wrongness in the world's fabric that vibrated through her enhanced senses like a discordant note in a familiar song. By the time the panicked villagers came pounding on her cottage door, she was already dressed for the woods, her fingers tracing the strange symbols carved into the walking stick Thomas had made for her. Thomas himself stood waiting beside her, his hunting knife glinting dully in the weak morning light, his golden eyes fixed on some point in the distance only he could see. The stag emerged from the trees as their ragged search party reached the forest's edge, its antlers casting elongated shadows that defied the angle of the rising sun. "It should not have been able to take form so soon," it said without preamble, its voice the dry rustle of dead leaves scraping against stone. Thomas responded with a growl that seemed to originate deeper than his human throat should allow, a sound that made several villagers step back in alarm. "What shouldn't have?" Lena demanded, her hands tightening around her staff until the symbols beneath her fingertips grew warm. The stag regarded her for a long moment, its hollow eyes reflecting nothing and everything simultaneously. "The hunger you awakened when you broke the pact," it finally answered. "It has tasted freedom now, and it remembers the flavor of blind children." A cold knot formed in Lena's stomach, twisting tighter with each word. Behind them, the villagers erupted in fearful murmurs, several making elaborate warding signs with trembling fingers. Then Joseph pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face haggard, his fine clothes disheveled as if he'd dressed in haste. "You brought this on us," he accused, pointing a shaking finger at Lena. The moment the words left his mouth, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Not like an earthquake, but in a single localized shudder that seemed to originate directly beneath Joseph, throwing him off balance. The villagers gasped, but Lena understood. The forest itself had reacted to the lie, because she knew, with sudden crystalline certainty, that this was no random attack. The thing in the woods hadn't chosen Marta by chance. Marta was Joseph's niece, his sister's only child. This was a message, a challenge. Thomas's knife flashed as he stepped forward, his movement still carrying traces of the canine grace from his years as the German shepherd. "We'll get her back," he said, his voice rough with barely contained rage. The stag tilted its head at an unnatural angle, the bones in its neck creaking like old branches in a storm. "You will try," it corrected. Then, leaning down so only Lena could hear, it added in a whisper like wind through dead grass, "But the forest demands balance, keeper. To retrieve what was taken, something of equal value must be offered." As if summoned by the words, the wind shifted abruptly, carrying with it two sounds that froze the blood in Lena's veins, the faint, terrified sobs of a child somewhere deep in the woods, and beneath that, woven through it like poison in wine, something far worse, the sound of something ancient and hungry laughing. The forest swallowed them whole as Lena and Thomas stepped beyond the tree line, the villagers' fearful murmurs fading into silence behind them. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves, undercut by something metallic. The sharp tang of fear that Lena now realized wasn't their own, but the forest itself holding its breath. Her enhanced senses painted the world in swirling hues of energy, the vibrant green pulse of ancient trees, the sickly yellow tendrils of corruption snaking between roots, and ahead, flickering like a dying candle, the faint blue aura of little Marta's terror. Thomas moved beside her with predator's grace, his knife gleaming with an eerie light only she could see, the golden glow in his eyes burning brighter with each step deeper into the woods. The trees began to change as they walked, their bark blackening, their branches twisting into agonized shapes that reached for the sky like skeletal fingers. The ground sloped downward into a hollow Lena had never seen before, though she'd walked these woods all her life. At its center stood a gnarled oak, its trunk split wide open to reveal a hollow that pulsed like a living heart. From within came the soft, hiccuping sobs of a child. But as Lena rushed forward, the stag's antlers blocked her path. "Look deeper," it whispered. And then she saw it, the trap. Marta hung suspended in the tree's hollow not by ropes or vines, but by strands of shimmering darkness that seemed to grow from the oak itself. Her tear-streaked face lit up when she saw them. "Aunt Lena!" she cried, stretching out small hands. But beneath the child's voice slithered another sound, that same terrible laughter from before, coming from the shadows pooling around the tree's roots. The darkness coalesced into a shape that hurt Lena's mind to perceive. Something with too many limbs, with eyes that opened and closed at random across its form, with a mouth that stretched impossibly wide to reveal not teeth, but tiny screaming faces. The bargain was broken, the thing hissed, its voice the sound of cracking ice. Now new terms must be set. Tomas lunged, his knife flashing, but the blade passed through the creature like smoke. It laughed again, the sound making the trees shudder. "Foolish dog, you cannot kill hunger." Lena stepped forward, her staff glowing where her hands gripped it. "What do you want?" The creature's many eyes fixed on her. What was promised? A keeper for the veil, a bridge between worlds. Its form shifted, and suddenly Lena saw the truth. This was no mere monster. It was the forest's shadow, the dark twin of the stag, born from every cruel act committed under these trees. "Your father bargained with my brother," it said, nodding toward the stag. "But he forgot that every light casts a shadow." Understanding crashed over Lena. The pact had never just been about sacrifice. It had been about balance. The stag protected, but this thing remembered, and it wanted justice. Marta whimpered as the dark tendrils tightened around her. "Please." Lena made her choice. She slammed her staff into the ground, the symbols along its length flaring white-hot. "Take me instead." The clearing fell utterly silent. Even the wind stilled. The creature tilted its head. "You would trade your life for hers?" "No," Lena said, lifting her chin. "I would trade my sight." For she understood now. Her blindness had never been a curse. It was a gift, the only way to see the world as it truly was. The creature hissed, its form writhing. "You offer what?" "All of it," Lena said. "Every last scrap of my vision. The normal sight you just returned to me. The magical sight I gained in the church. Take it all, leave me in true darkness, and let the girl go." The stag made a sound like a dying tree falling. "Child, you do not know what you ask." "I do," Lena interrupted. "I'm the keeper. This is my choice." A beat of terrible silence. Then the creature laughed, but this time there was something almost like respect in the sound. "Done." The world exploded in pain. Lena fell to her knees as fire raced through her optic nerves, as her mind's eye, the one that had seen auras and energies, was scoured clean. The last thing she saw was Marta tumbling free into Thomas's arms, the dark tendrils retreating. The last thing she heard was the creature's whisper, "The bargain is struck." Then, nothing. True, absolute darkness. When consciousness returned, Lena lay on cool grass, Thomas's calloused hands gripping hers. "Lena, can you hear me?" She nodded, disoriented. The world was silent in a way it had never been before. No whispers of spirits, no hum of magic. Just ordinary sounds, birdsong, wind in leaves, Marta's quiet crying. "You're a fool," Tomas said, but his voice was thick with emotion. Lena smiled. "I'm the keeper." And though she couldn't see it, she felt the exact moment when the stag and its shadow bowed to her in respect. Moral lesson: true sight isn't about vision, it's about understanding what matters enough to sacrifice for. Darkness can be a gift when it helps us see the light in others, and some debts can't be paid with gold or blood, but only with the courage to face what others fear.